Welcome everyone to the first of a four-part webinar series that will explore the Swiss UAV ecosystem and its many facets. The goals of this webinar is to increase your awareness and to outline how your company can participate in Switzerland's technological and regulatory march towards the future. Each webinar in this series will provide in-depth perspectives and real-world cases and will provide a distinct focus on topics such as integration, innovation, testing, partnering, and deployment. My name is Julian, and I will be moderating today's presentation. This webinar series has been co-developed by my organization, the Greater Geneva Bern area, as well as the organization known as the Greater Zurich area. My colleague with the Greater Zurich area, Lucas Sieber, who is also on this call, will be moderating future sessions in this series. The common goals of our organization are to act as a single source of free support and assistance to companies interested in exploring business opportunities, expansion opportunities, scientific collaborations, and partnerships. Before proceeding further, I'd like to take a moment to do some quick housekeeping. This webinar will be 1 hour in duration. 45 minutes will be for presentation by our panelists, and we'll reserve 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. If you have a question, please submit them in the text box, such as that indicated on the right of your screen, and we will do the best to answer them during this session. If we are unable to respond to your question, or you would like to reach out to any of us directly, our email addresses will be made available throughout, as well as at the end of this webinar. I'll also note that a recording of this session will be made available at the sites indicated on this slide. As many of you know, Switzerland has become a bellwether to the global UAV sector, with industry, researchers, academia, government, and the regulatory authorities all being aligned and supporting continued advancements in the industry. Switzerland has established itself as a leading location for innovation, testing, and deployment of UAV technologies in a highly regulated but open skies environment. Our regulatory authorities are working closely with industry and their counterparts around the world to develop tools and digital technologies that will ultimately lead to an integrated and safe airspace. Switzerland offers a unique opportunity for companies to innovate, test, refine, and ultimately deploy their technologies in the real world, enabling the collection of invaluable experience and data that can be directly applied to the broader commercial market. With that brief introduction out of the way, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for today. First up is Manu Lubrano. Manu is president of the Drone Industry Association of Switzerland. He is also the CEO and co-founder of Involi, the leading provider of air traffic detection and tracking solutions for drones and UTMs. At present, Manu is also a board member of the Global UTM Association, which is headquartered in Switzerland. Manu has been in the drone industry since 2012. Before Involi, he was the head of industrialization for the company SenseFly. Next up will be Marcel Kaegi. Marcel co-leads the Innovation and Digitalization Unit of the Federal Office of Civil Aviation of Switzerland, also known as FOCA. He is in charge of strategy development and implementation with the view to position Switzerland at the forefront of disruptive innovation trends, such as in drones and UTM. Marcel coordinates and represents FOCA's interest in national and international regulatory and policy-making efforts in these areas. In his previous position, he was in charge of international aviation safety regulation and represented Switzerland in the Administrative and Budgetary Committee of the UN General Assembly. Finishing up today's program will be Kevin Sartori. Kevin is the co-founder at Auterion in Zurich. He holds a master's in robotics from the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, also known as ETH, and an MBA from UC Berkeley. Kevin had his first touch point with the drone industry in 2008 when he was researching optimal control algorithms as part of the early Pixhawk team at ETH. After working as a strategy consultant for the Boston Consulting Group, he moved to the Bay Area in 2014 and joined 3DR as Senior Product Marketing Manager for SiteScan. In 2017, he founded Auterion, the world's largest open source drone software company, together with Lorenz Meyer. Kevin will showcase the drone technology ecosystem in Switzerland and put a particular focus on the collaboration between academia and industry. And with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Manu.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, here we go. I hope you can see my screen. Should be coming now. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity today to tell you more about DIAS and about how Switzerland is important for the drone industry. So let me start with an interesting picture. This is the picture of the European Union, and it's kind of funny, but Switzerland is always the hole in the middle of European market. So you could ask yourself why it is so important with a drone company to be in Switzerland. Switzerland, it's a very important country for drones because it's the entry point to the rest of the European market. This is really what we are bringing here, especially when we talk in terms of regulation for drones. We are extremely advanced. We are probably the most advanced country in the world, but I will explain this to Marcel. DIAS proposes itself as the interface between the industry, the drone industry, and the regulators, so the Swiss authority FOCA. Why regulation is so important for drones at this time? I imagine that you have already seen this curve a lot of time if you are familiar with the startup world. And as you know, the drone industry is somewhere between the peak of irrational exuberance and the truth of disillusionment. But to complicate more things, you have also the drone regulation, which is coming. And it's creating a lot of disruption into what we were doing before. Let me tell you with straightforward that the drone regulation is getting closer to the aviation world, actually. And this is something very difficult. This is why I'm pretty sure to say this following sentence: a lot of companies or startups will fail, apart the one that are going to implement faster and more efficiently regulation in the drone world. And this is why it's very important to be connected to the regulator. So what are the mission of DIAS? The first of all is to facilitate access to standard regulation, as you were saying. So you imagine we all come from the startup world, and we have to learn how to implement those standards, how to discuss with regulators, and we want to facilitate this kind of interaction. We also foster the collaboration between the DIAS community. We are going to see afterwards who are our members. And then we also promote and support the Swiss drone industry. We're going abroad in the European market, the American one, and so on. And also we communicate with the public and we promote DIAS members. Here you have a sneak peek of the logos of our members. What's interesting here is that you can see, if you are familiar with those companies, you can see drone maker companies that provide services to drones, big multinationals, basically any possible company related to drones. So it's really an heterogeneous group. Another way to see it is here. Sorry for the broken slide, but you can see the different application that our members have here in Switzerland. As Matt was mentioning before, Switzerland is really the Silicon Valley of drones. We have one company or even more for each possible service or drone kind of that exists, and they are all together into our association. Those are the kind of activities that we organize. First of all, as said before, we have a permanent link between the Swiss Aviation Authority, FOCA, and the DIAS member. We create also a working group in order to allow an easy access to standard and certification. We participate events like this one, together with Present Swiss, Swiss Next, and so on. And also we have a strong link with the academic drone scene in Switzerland. As Matt was mentioning before, there are two big polytechnics here, the EPFL and ETH, with the laboratory that are creating new technology, and we're also fostering the link with them. Finally, we organize events on networking if COVID allow us to do it in real life. And then finally, we have a platform to exchange faster between our members, like WhatsApp groups, Slack channels, and so on. Now I want to show you a little bit some things that we have done in the past just to give an idea. One, it has been to coordinate together with our member in order to respond to an EASA regulation that was coming for drones. So in April, we respond to this NPA all together to let EASA understand what's the point of view of drone companies for this particular regulation. So kind of having more interaction with the regulator. That's something also very interesting that we did this summer. So we did a standard workshop with FOCA together with Benoit Courdy. You can see here, this is the implementation of UTM, how it will look like. And then for every different block, we'll have a standard that will represent how this is going to be implemented. And our idea was really to help our member to understand what is going to happen and how they could follow as fast as possible. We also organized the Aviation Digital Transformation Forum in 2019, where several of our members were able to meet and to showcase what they're doing in order to increase their reach out. And then this is very important. We took part to the first UTM demonstration in Switzerland in 2018 in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, where also Doris Leuter, our Swiss consular, was present. Last but not least, this was another event, the Swiss Drone Industry Day that we did in 2018, our first official event. And again, the matter here is to have an ecosystem, a vibrant ecosystem that is able to talk together in order to go in the same direction. As I was mentioning before, we're also working in doing partnership with academia and government. Academia from one side is very important because the driver of all the innovation are our very good polytechnic and school that we have here in Switzerland, while with government bodies, for example, this event that you're seeing now, it's what allow us to show what we're doing outside Switzerland. This is our board. I'm the president myself, then Adam Klaptoch is vice president, Simon Johnson, Frederick Emler, and Kevin Sartori, which will speak later, are other board members. So to finish, this is what you have to get, what you have to remember from this talk. Switzerland is the entry door for you for the European drone market. Drone regulation in Switzerland is more advanced than anywhere else, and you really need to be involved there to understand what is going on. Companies getting drone regulation implemented have more chances to succeed. And then DIAS is the interface with FOCA, so with the regulator. DIAS helps with the export, and DIAS facilitates the communication between its members and the public. So my presentation is over, and then I give the word back to Matt. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. And yeah, we'll turn the floor over to Marcel Kaegi with FOCA.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you can see my presentation and hear me. Thanks for the organization of this interesting webinar and for the invitation. Also, thanks to Manu for the excellent presentation. I really also want to emphasize that there's a short message that I probably need to so I hope you can see me now as well. Yeah, great. Yeah, what I want to say is that thanks to Manu, I think he really underlined the most important aspects of our collaboration. In Switzerland, we really have a very close relationship between us as the safety regulator and the industry because we are dealing with a new technology here, and we need to find a good regulatory framework that on the one hand protects public interests such as safety, security, environmental protection, that we don't have a deterioration of our safety level in the aviation system as a whole, but also really maximizes the room for innovation and makes it as cheap as possible to commercialize technologies that come from the R&D, from the academic sectors, from companies, and allow these companies to monetize what they do as quickly as possible. I'm Marcel, I work at FOCA. I think it was mentioned already, I co-lead ID. My team is a very heterogeneous group of people. On the one hand, we have engineers who know a lot about drones, who have worked on really developing safety methodologies, about which I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes. But we also have people who work on communication, because we have a lot of stakeholders that we have to deal with, stakeholder engagement. We also have a very strong legal background, because as Manu mentioned, you cannot access or you cannot commercialize technologies in the drone space without being compliant with potentially future regulations. So we want to have an impact on how drones are regulated in the future, not only in Switzerland, but also in Europe and globally. Switzerland is a very small market, so we really care very much about the international piece in this discussion. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So my unit has basically the task of looking at what's coming from the university, from the companies, finding new regulatory frameworks, trying to grant approvals as cheaply, as quickly as possible in a constructive manner based on a dialogue with industry, and then ensuring that, as I said, global policy, regulation, and standardization, I think it's also very important, Manu mentioned that before, really match the interest of the Swiss ecosystem. So we really see ourselves first and foremost as an entity that makes sure that public interests are protected, so we don't have too many accidents, for example, but also as very much as an authority that makes sure that new technologies can be integrated quickly and access other markets efficiently and quickly in this drone space and the other new technologies in aviation. A little bit more about the role of our role and the role of Switzerland in innovation in general. As you might know or might not know, Switzerland is not a country that has like a really big government. We have a rather small government in comparison in Europe, and we also don't have like an activist industrial or innovation policy. So it's not the case that we as a state would come and say, we want to have as many drone companies as possible in Switzerland. We don't buy equity in drone companies, for example. So we don't think that we as the state somehow have a particularly good insight of what where the market will develop itself. We view our role much more as observing the market in a very analytical, in a very sort of proactive way. We look at what's coming from R&D, and we try to enable these technologies, or we try to play a role so these new technologies can be commercialized and used as quickly as possible. So we don't think we know which technology is next and then focus on that and spend money on that. We just see what the companies want, what the market wants, and then try to play our role so these technologies can access airspace as quickly as possible. To start, a few examples on how we did that. I think we saw a picture already of the Matternet drone that works together with Swiss Post in Matt's presentation in the beginning. This is one example where we really had to basically write a completely new way on how we authorized an operation. There it was Swiss Post, as I mentioned, and Matternet, so Swiss-American companies. They wanted to deliver blood samples between hospitals. They now do that in 3 cities in Switzerland, in Zurich, Lubrano, which is in the Italian-speaking part in the south, and in Bern, the capital. They received the world's first authorization to fly beyond visual line of sight, so outside the view of the pilot in a very highly automated way, and also within controlled airspace, because in many of these cities there's an aerodrome close by, so the airspace is used by different users as well. So there were a lot of challenges linked to the coordination of these drone operations and the other airspace users. And what always makes me particularly happy is that based on these operations, the companies also started to operate in other countries. There's some nice footage about it, but I think what I really want to emphasize is that what we as an authority had to do was really pioneering work. There was really no rule book. We didn't know how we could authorize such an operation. There was no law, so we had to really write one together with the applicant, together with Post and Matternet. And what we then came up with is really, we really try to ensure that this becomes a global standard. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We call this the SORA, the Specific Operations Risk Assessment. And this now allows Matternet, for example, to get an approval more easily in the US, for example, or in other countries as well. So that really illustrates our way of working. So we don't only focus on Switzerland, we try to identify new regulatory approaches, but then also try to push them into the global policy discourse and to the global sort of regulatory landscape. Another example of what's going on in Switzerland and what we were able to authorize because we work closely with industry was this company Meteomatics. Maybe some of you know what they do. They capture weather data quite high up. They fly up to 5 kilometers in certain areas. They and they gather data, which then they sell to entities that provide weather forecasts. They also have an international reach. They do this not only in Switzerland by now, but also in other countries. And what's, I think, important to emphasize here you can see also some footage how this works, is that it's really an untypical operation if we think about aviation. Usually in aviation, we want to transport stuff or we want to do construction work with a helicopter, for example. But what this drone does is basically it flies up and down all the time, and that's it. So that's not something we know from like from manned aviation. So we really also here have to be very creative, come up with the regulatory framework, how we, for example, manage that this drone doesn't collide with other airspace users. And there again, we try to use this methodology and then push it internationally, so we could allow that company and other companies that do similar things to access different markets. Another example that's maybe a bit more mundane is but where you can already see drone technology at scale in Switzerland is crop spraying. So we have already 20 authorized companies in Switzerland that do agricultural applications. I think that it's mostly forbidden in other countries in Europe. So that also sort of underlines that we really mean it when we say we're open to innovation. FOCA is the competent authority, but there are also many other competent authorities involved. You can imagine if you spray pesticides, you want to discuss with the Environmental Protection Agency, you want to discuss with the Federal Office of Agriculture. So what we did, we tried to simplify this arduous process and made us the single point of contact with the view to helping these companies to get approvals more easily. And also, obviously, and here you can see some nice sort of vineyards, which is always nice to look at. And we also try to get this approval, sort of take what we learned from these approval processes and again, push it to international level so these companies can also fly in Europe and elsewhere and sell their drones, obviously, for that purpose. For the remainder of my presentation, I mean, I think Manu mentioned many other companies as well, and I think from one of the most impressive companies we'll hear in a minute when Kevin speaks about Auterion, which is really fascinating. I think what they do, so you get a bit more in-depth insight what's really possible in the Swiss drone ecosystem. But for the remainder of my presentation, I would like to speak a bit more about sort of our general strategy, what strategy we try to implement when really trying to put our mandate into practice, enabling innovation, but keeping safety and other public interests at the level as we know it. So what we do in Switzerland is we try to have a regulation that's non-prescriptive, and we do this by using this tool I mentioned, this specific operations risk assessment, which we developed in Switzerland, then worked together with international organizations such as Charles. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute, to push it to become a global standard. But the reason why we think this is a really good way to authorize drone operations is that it is non-prescriptive. So we don't tell an applicant how to achieve safety. They tell us, and we just review in a harmonized manner, in a standardized manner. It is risk-based, so we don't ask drone operators or drone manufacturers to show us the same thing regardless of what they do. We really try to exploit as much as possible the risk structure of unmanned aviation. So we don't care if the drone crashes where in an environment where there's no one around or no one in the airspace. So we really try to exploit as much as possible this risk structure, and it really depends what you want to do, basically the requirements you need to fulfill. And we also really let the applicants propose the safety case. So we don't think we're more innovative than the industry. We think it's actually the other way around. We think the industry is better at coming up with creative solutions. So we let them do it, and we then just review. And it's, as I mentioned, the process of becoming a global standard. So our general strategy to come up with stuff like that is we try to first and foremost identify the sort of the regulatory need of the Swiss industry. I think Manu showed it nicely with this hype curve. So we try to see where the industry or the specific stakeholder is on that curve. We try to understand what they need. We then try to enable them to fly as pragmatically, as quickly as possible. We then try to influence global policy and regulation to make whatever authorization we issued in Switzerland compatible or as easily compatible as possible with other efforts or in other jurisdictions, and by that enable the Swiss industry to export, because we saw it on Manu's map before, small Switzerland. I mean, nobody really cares about our market size, but so we need to make sure that export can happen. This is really of paramount importance in our view, and we do that by really actively engaging in international forums to influence this discussion. For SORA, this methodology I presented before and that we use to authorize all these operations that I showed some footage of before, we managed to get this into the regulation or into regulatory processes in all the countries that you see in green here. So it is in the future European Union drone regulation, which is obviously very important for us, but it is also in the Canadian regulation, in the US regulation, at least elements of it. India and China are currently have regulatory processes. that are ongoing, where they consider to take SORA on board as well. And in Australia, there already have been operations authorized based on that methodology. So that really shows you that it's not only strategy, but we also managed to put it into practice. How do we do that? We really are committed to cooperate. We don't think we can do everything on our own. We really think we need to cooperate with other stakeholders because we want to convince them, obviously, of the way we work, and so we can then allow our industry to export. But we are a small authority, so we also need cooperation to learn and to get insights and inform what we do. So we obviously work with Kaegi, the International Civil Aviation Organization of the UN system. We are a full member of EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, which is part of the European Union, which recently has published a new regulation on drones, which also contains SORA, and is now working on a new regulation on U-Space or UTM, which we also heavily try to influence, and I think successfully have influenced already. We founded SUSI, the Swiss U-Space Implementation Public Partnership. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. We are also founding member of the Global UTM Association, which Manu mentioned before. We are very active in Charles. We lead 2 of 7 working groups, one of which specifically works on SORA and tries to, for example, currently make the link between safety and SORA, the way we look at risk and the way we authorize drone operations as well. And we're also a member of ASTM, I think one of the very few authorities there. So we really have a good overview on what's going on the standardization front. We have good exchanges with universities. Why? Because we want to understand what comes next, and we want to be ready to, for example, be able to authorize non-deterministic software approaches in aviation or stuff like that. We're also, as Manu mentioned, I don't need to repeat it, we are very much involved with all the relevant association there. DIAS, I think, is of course very important. And I think it's key to underline that we also have a declaration of intent with the FAA, which I think is the one of the most important aviation authority in the world, the American Civil Aviation Authority, with whom we exchange very actively on the topic of UTM and integration of drones in the airspace. Let me say a word more on sort of how this collaboration can look like in practice. These are the companies that are engaged in SUSI, the Swiss U-Space Implementation Private-Public Partnership. Why did we found this? We were a very strong advocate of making this possible. We did this because we understood rather quickly that with SORA, it is possible to authorize drone operations like the one by Post Maternet that you saw, but we also understood that without having a digital infrastructure in place, it would be really hard to integrate drones into the airspace at scale, because it's still very human-centric. Sort of the infrastructure we use to manage airspace still very much follows an analog paradigm, and we want to digitize that. And we, as a small authority, a small country, would not have been able to say we just stand up this entire effort on our own. So we try to invite all the companies that intend to offer services in this future market for services on how to manage the airspace in a digital manner, and stood up this SUSI private-public partnership. The goal there is to take standards that exist and demonstrate how they can be implemented, then take lessons learned, change the standards, change the regulation, make sure we come up with a global, ideally global, or at least European innovation-friendly regulatory framework. Next milestone here is that we have a network-based remote ID solution, so you can remotely ID drones from the ground before the end of this year, and we are making good progress to that end. I mean us as the authority, together with all these companies. My last slide, why Switzerland? I think I don't want to repeat too much of what Manu said. I think we are a civil aviation authority with an innovation-friendly track record, so we don't only say we're open to innovation. I think we have shown that we mean it and that we can, on the one hand, protect public interests, but also allow innovation to thrive. We are highly connected at international level. We have a proven track record as well, of an impact on global policy, regulation, and standards. I think this is key. So if you become actively here with your company, you can really count on us to make sure that regulatory frameworks globally, that we will influence them in a way that makes sense for you. I don't mean you as an individual company, but you as an ecosystem. And I think Manu mentioned it already, we have the best university among some of the best universities worldwide in the sort of key technology fields that are needed for drones. So you will not need to look for a long time for qualified employees. We already have an existing digital aviation ecosystem that Manu presented, and we will learn more from one of the most impressive companies from Auterion in a minute. And we are also, I think, one of the world leading authorities when it comes to digital infrastructure for the integration of drones in the airspace, which I think more and more will be sort of a key enabling factor to scale up drone technology. With that, I would like to thank again the organizers for inviting us to speak here, and I would like to give the floor back to Matt. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Marcel. So I think it's a great opportunity to turn the floor over to Kevin Sartori, who can provide his unique perspective from the corporate standpoint, and you know, their links to academia, the regulatory authorities, and so forth. So please, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks everyone for organizing this webinar, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And in the next 15 minutes, I hope to bring you closer to the technology in Switzerland and to an idea that was born 12 years ago and that today is one of the big technology standards in our industry, PX4, and then its commercial or enterprise product, Auterion. And throughout my travels, I've always been fascinated by how much Swiss people love drones, but I also found out that Swiss people are not the only inhabitants in Switzerland that appreciate autonomous systems. Here in this video that we'll show shortly, you will see a drone flying on the top left. This was taken in our tests early 2009, 2010. And with this, I bring you to the start of this idea of PX4, which is the PICSOC team at ETH Zurich, led by Dr. Lorenz Meyer and other 13 students that set out with a challenge to build the first small drone system that was able to do computer vision on board. You see the system on the right side. It's the PICSOC drone. And really the world's first drone being able to recognize patterns and navigate autonomously, having the compute on board. And that's pretty amazing when we think that this was 2008, just 1 year after the iPhone launched, that allowed small and powerful compute that was energy efficient to be available at a relatively cheap price. The team as well won a European competition in 2008 and 2009 called EMAV in the Netherlands. And what happened then is amazing when you look at it in retrospective, but was very difficult to imagine looking forward. The team realized that it was really not easy, but it was doable to build the technology and do this path planning flight once. But it was really hard to productize this technology and make it available to thousands, if not millions of drone systems at scale. And that's when in 2008, the team around Lorenz Meyer open sourced the technology with the hope that other users, universities, researchers would use it, would provide feedback, and maybe even contribute to it, making it better. What followed in the next year is this amazing story, which added in 2009 other software packages, Mavlink, which is the communication protocol between the drone and the ground, Q ground control, which is the ground application that allows a pilot to plan a mission and fly a mission. With the years, the project saw more and more adoptions, mainly by international universities first, before it came back to Switzerland. And in 2011, after the fourth rewrite, PX4 was born. That's as well PX4, the short for PICSOC, and 4 because it was the fourth rewrite. And we really hope that this is the last one. At least so far, it has been widely adopted. PX4 is the embedded software that runs on a drone. It controls its flight, both at low level, the stability of the drone with all the controls, the control systems, but then as well the higher level intelligence that allows the drone to navigate. In 2013-14, the project or the technology slowly was adopted outside of academia, more and more by companies building products that were based around this technology. First, autopilots. People in the industry know the PICSOC autopilots, a cheap way to make a drone fly. And in 2014, 15, 16, then the first ready-to-fly systems. Very important for every open source project is this external endorsement by the Linux Foundation. You really made it as an open source project when you become part of the Linux Foundation as a project. And that happened in 2016. And from then on, the code got complexer, enabling even more complex applications. In 2017, there was a complete computer vision integration with additional compute, enabling the drone to do more compute on board than was possible before. 2018, Mav SDK, which is an open SDK, was born that allows more and more developers to use the technology without having to go deep down into the code and actually in C++ modify the flight controller, but is able to write apps and higher level applications for drones in Java or in Python in easier code. And that enables the ecosystem to grow even further. In 2019, the project became very close to ROS, which is the Robot Operating System. That's another very widely adopted robotic open source project. And in 2020, following the tradition over the years, we added additional standards to the technology, not just flight control standard, which the PICSOC is very famous for, but as well standards for smart batteries and for camera or sensor integration. Today, PX4 powers or is the base of many, many products, ranging from small drone toys that you can buy at Best Buy or an electronic shop to flying cars, as is in the picture. And here is just an excerpt of some of the companies that are using the technology. But let me give you some examples that are much more concrete. This is a consumer or prosumer product by Unique, a Chinese company that was awarded the Best Design Award at CES a couple of years ago. We have enterprise or commercial industrial systems for heavy duty work. This is a drone by a US company called FreeFly that is used in cinematography to fly cameras that are worth $100,000 or more. So reliability is really important. Some logistic companies are using PX4 to ship cargo. That's an example of a drone used by UPS. PX4 is also widely used in other cargo applications. For example, here, that's a drone by a Dutch company called Avi, who's transporting medical supplies over Lake Kivu in Rwanda. This picture was taken this year during the African Drone Forum, where multiple companies competed against each other for this task to precisely deliver small cargo like medical supplies from point A to point B. We also have some local companies to Switzerland. This is a mapping drone by the Swiss company Wingtra that is taking advantage of PX4 to take off vertically and then transition into forward flight that is way more efficient, so it can capture more data, more images, fly for longer, but still be able to take off and land like a helicopter without needing a runway. There are also very big systems flying PX4. This is a cargo drone by Elroy Air, a San Francisco-based company, and you can see the size of the system comparing it to that's not a model, an RC model, that's a full-scale manned airplane in the back. And finally, and probably more amazingly, also the Jetman is using PX4. I'm not sure I would recommend it, but it's possible. Jetman uses PX4 to take off from the ground and take flight without having to jump from a helicopter like he did in the past years. So really, there's no limit to what the technology can be used for. The ecosystem, the PX4 ecosystem today is massive. It grew out from the small idea in Switzerland to be used today by over 10,000 developers. That's huge. That is a public number as well. You can see the downloads on GitHub in the public repository. Those are all developers that use the technology, and some of them even contribute back, making the technology better day by day. Similar to Linux, the PX4 ecosystem lives from contributions from individual developers, from companies, and from academia that make the product better every day. The result of this, and this is an estimation that we did, it's very difficult to understand how many products are deployed with PX4 out there, but if you look at what companies are using it, we can reverse engineer the number, and we estimate that over 1 million systems, 1 million products are flying today using this technology. Like every open source project, there needs to be a commercial entity, a catalyst for its productization. Remember that PX4, PixHawk, Mavlink, QGC, all this are technologies. It's not products. You can download it from the internet, but it's millions of lines of code. So even though it's free, it has a cost because it's very difficult to use. You need experienced people, experienced developers to use it. You need to test it. You need to tune it. So there is cost involved in bringing and building a product that is using this technology. We set out 3 years ago. Actually, today is our 3rd birthday, November 16, 2017. We founded the company together with Lorenz Meyer, my co-founder, with a goal to make the adoption of PX4 easier and to provide a product that is easy to use and adoptable by drone manufacturers and eventually as well by the enterprises that use those products. So what we do is we take the core technology PX4, which is comparable to the Linux kernel, and we improve it, we test it, we provide software updates, we even certify it, and we add functionalities on top that enterprises care about, like fleet management, maintenance, security, communication, and even applications. The software platform runs on 3 different systems, one on the ground. It's the ground application that allows you to plan a mission if you're a pilot. The second part is the embedded software that is like an operating system powering a drone. No matter if that is a quadcopter or a VTOL, small or large, we support multiple systems. And finally, the core is the Auterion suite, which is this centralized hub for drone data that allows users to manage their pilots, manage their fleet, know who is flying what drone and where, so they can provide compliance reports to authorities. In the course of our lifetime, we work with several manufacturers, and today there are a couple handful of systems in the market that fly our operating system. You see them here. As well, we work with payload vendors, some of the largest payload vendors in the world, so that we can offer choice to the end user, because now they can pick and choose different payloads, different drones, and you all have the same user experience and the same integration points. The second core of what we do is that we connect drones to the cloud, or the sensor that a drone carries to the cloud. That allows operators, enterprises, and even government to build end-to-end workflows from the camera on a drone to their enterprise ERP system. And let me give you an example of that, how that works in mapping. A mapping company chooses the system that they prefer to fly, a VTOL for long range operations or multicopter for shorter operations. They pick the best camera, in this case, the Sony RX1, which we integrated a couple months ago. And they can connect that to the Auterion suite, and from here on, directly integrate the output, the pictures that the drone collects, to their Esri workflow. Esri is the largest geospatial information system company in the world. So really, end-to-end, we offer enterprises complete workflows independently of what drones they're flying, what payloads they're using, or where they're flying. And the closest analogy that we came up with is Android. Android as well as an operating system that runs on a smart device that is connected to the internet, has a camera, has a GPS. It runs applications, and it gives the user the security that their data is safe, and that no matter what phones they're using, all their data and apps work. This analogy with Android, together with the fact that the US government is banning drones and autonomous systems that are made by Chinese companies or made with Chinese components, gives us a lot of traction, mainly in the US. So far that Forbes named our company as the one company that could change the drone industry in the US. So even though our largest market is in the US, and I spent several years working and studying in Silicon Valley, I came back to Switzerland to found Auterion. And here are some of the reasons why. I won't go into the details of each because we've heard from Manu and as well Marcel, but let me quickly use the last minute I have to go and give you some examples. First, world-class education. We all know EPFL and ETH, but I want to highlight as well the Swiss dual education system with the higher education schools that bring every year to the market skilled engineers in testing, in engineering products, in industrial processes, and those are not your PhD in computer vision or machine learning, but is talent that you need if you want to bring to market successful products. In internal competition, not only between the two federal institutes, but as well internal to the different labs. When I started in 2008, I think every ETH lab was using different software or was doing their own. And this healthy and fair internal competition pushed the different teams to give more, to invest more, and to speed up their development. And I think that was healthy for our ecosystem in Switzerland. Talent pool, not only because they're recent grads, but as well because they're alumni of drone companies. And since our history goes back to 2008, there are a lot of veterans of the industry that work in Switzerland. If you're a startup, there's lots of support for founders. Auterion, we raised $25 million so far in the last 3 years. And that was a number that was hard to believe as a Swiss startup, even 5-7 years ago. So even the startup ecosystem is changing and is supporting its founders. Regulations, we've heard from Marcel, nothing to add here. And finally, I think the one very strong plus point of Switzerland is really that it's the home of PX4. PX4 was born here. You have the talent here, you have the experts here. And the magic word for me is ecosystem. It's really multiple companies, academia, regulators working together in an open way that brought us where we are today in Switzerland. And with this, I give back the word to Matt for our Q&A session.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin. Let me switch my screen there. Okay. Kevin, and thank you, gentlemen, for the very, very informative presentations. We have a number of questions to go through. Some are quite specific, some are more general in nature. I've been working to consolidate them as much as possible into sort of general themes. So I think we'll start with a general question, if I may. So the question is, and I think it's for anybody who wants to answer, where do you see potential or future opportunities for those foreign drone companies who would like to plug into or otherwise be part of this Swiss phenomenon, if you will?
I can take that one if you like. Look, so with the regulation which is coming very fast, and the fact that we're going to have a use space on a national level, I think that any possible drone service, BVLOS flight, drone taxi in the next year is going to be something that we are going to have here. So companies coming here and developing these new services would be very appreciated.
Okay.
Maybe if I may add something to that, I mean, from an authority perspective, I think as long as you as a company do something that's safe and sustainable in the end, we will do our best to improve you regardless of what kind of an operation, what kind of business case you want to realize. I think you really have the potential to use or to work with an innovation-friendly authority. Also, starting next year, there will be a regulation in all of Europe that will bring legal certainty to the world's largest market, that is the EU. And we as the FOCA and the Swiss ecosystem as a whole, we heavily influenced large parts of that regulation, and we can thus be, as Switzerland, an excellent base for your company to access the entire European market, because we know the European regulation very well, and authorization that we issue will ideally be recognized by other countries. And I think we are also work really hard, as I mentioned, to stand up a digital infrastructure to integrate drones in the airspace. So coming to Switzerland, I think it's a huge opportunity to either also try to offer services in that space or use these services to scale up your products or services.
Okay, thank you. So I guess there's a follow-up to that I see. There's a number of questions about sort of where the industry is going, or where you think it's going, and I'll try to sort of boil that down into a single question. And again, this could be for anybody who wants to answer. So can you comment on your vision as to what this Swiss or maybe even the broader UAV ecosystem may look like in, let's say, 5 years from now?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's always easy to look backwards and say we all knew that PX4 was going to be the standard, but 12 years ago we had no idea. What I see at a geostrategic level is that the US and China won consumer tech. The US and China won the smartphone battle. The US and China won the cloud battle. And all the time, Europe was left behind. But I think here in the field of autonomous systems, and drone is a subpart of that, I think that Europe has a considerable advantage compared to the US and China. And I think open source, PX4 and other open source projects in the drone space are the reason for that. In addition, I think whenever you have a system that is complex as a drone, that has software engineering on the mechanical side, testing, computer vision, machine learning, all these different technology aspects combined, I think both Swiss people or the Swiss ecosystem and Europe is stronger than both China and the US. And if I may make a projection, I really hope that the next autonomy platform will be based in Europe, hopefully, and will be based around open standards. If that is, you know, a company we know today, I don't know if that is a new company, you know, time will tell, but I think it's inevitable that Europe has an advantage here.
Great. Okay, there are a number of questions, and they get quite granular. And I think a lot of them are focused on the regulatory environment. And again, if we can't get to all of your questions, we'll do our best to respond to them after the fact. This one's directed to Marcel, and it's related to Matternet. There's a question about them flying in Bern and Ticino and Zurich, and this person is just curious about sort of the process or the application for them to be able to fly BVLOS and so forth. So, you know, how did that sort of transpire, if you will?
I think there's a historical perspective and there's a description of how this would work if such a company would apply now. The historical perspective is obviously much more complicated than the way we will authorize such an operation right now. Why? Because now we know how to do it, because we gathered the experience. So what we developed is this process called SORA that I mentioned in my presentation, And if I don't know where you're coming from, but if you work with a company that would want to do similar operations as the one that Matternet and the Swiss Post are doing in Switzerland or elsewhere in Europe, what you would need to do is to follow the SORA process. And this process basically distinguishes between the ground risk and the air risk. The ground risk being the likelihood that you hit someone on the ground, and that being a safety issue. The air risk is that you hit someone in another aircraft in the air. And basically convince us that you have sufficient risk mitigation strategies that you use to minimize or to bring the risk of either hitting someone on the ground or in the air down to an acceptable level. How you do this is up to you. And this is, I think, why in the beginning I said there's historical and the present or sort of a current perspective. Historically, there was not really any guidance on how to achieve that. However, in the time since we issued these operations back a few years ago, we have learned a lot. And there are now a lot of annexes that you could use to authorize such an operation.
Okay, thank you. So this is a question that sort of melds, sort of industry and regulation and who's driving who. The question is, do you see the relatively tight status of the regulations, how they would push the drone manufacturers to prioritize quality and functionality over cost for now, and any other influences that regulations are having on drone hardware production at present, or the overall strategies, if you will? That makes sense.
I think I have a few thoughts on that, but maybe my colleagues Manu or Kaegi want to start.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I think it basically comes down to the question how risk-based and how technology neutral these regulations are. I think the European regulation, I think other countries follow this approach that was developed by Charles, this joint authorities on rulemaking on unmanned systems that I mentioned in my presentation. They follow this 3-category approach. So there's like an open category where you don't need to interact with the regulator, however, which is regulated in a very prescriptive manner. And there, I think the tendency that was described or implied by the person who asked the question, there I think you have the regulation actually drive a lot of the R&D or commercialization of R&D. Then you have a specific category in the middle where that you basically fall in when you want to fly outside this easy open category. So if you want to fly, for example, beyond visual line of sight, so flying a drone outside the contact of the pilot, or if you want to overfly crowds of people, or flying really challenging airspaces that are used by many other airspace users. So if you're in that part, you need to interact with us as a regulator. However, the way you do this is based, or basically follows this SORA process that I mentioned before, which is completely risk-based. So there it is really up to the applicant to convince us that whatever technology they want to use is safe enough to fly. So that I think there really the sort of the prescriptiveness or the way regulation would push technology into one way or another way, and also maybe have an impact on the quality of the products developed, is really minimal. And then there's a third category where we look at drones like manned aircraft, which is called certified category, but I think that's not relevant for that question. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure.
I think so. I think so. It's, what are the driving forces, and yeah, he did a good job. So this one's for Kevin specifically, and I think we have time for 2 more questions. So Kevin, someone asked how much AI is utilized in your platform, and how. I guess you'll choose how much you want to answer that, but that's the question.
Absolutely. AI is used in 2 ways. I think the first way we use it is to increase safety of systems. So we run machine learning, we build machine learning models and run them over flight logs that the drones are creating while they're flying. Those are over 800 variables that come in at 100 hertz or more, and we try to understand if we're finding anything or any indication that could lead to a problem or a failure. So we can see into temperature of the processor, load of the CPU, vibrations, anything really close to silicon or really close to electronics that could give an indication data problem is arising. And we go into the direction of predictive maintenance. We're able to, in real time, analyze that data, those flight logs, and predict if we're going towards a potential failure. And that means that we can remove those vehicles from flight, and so increase the reliability of the whole fleet. And we do this at scale, really at scale, over hundreds of thousands of systems in the future. The other part where we don't, as Auterion, do not use AI, but our partners do, is on the processing of data. So Droneflies captures images, those are streamed to your cloud or over an SD card, get to your system. And then you use computer vision to stitch those pictures together into a model, 2D, 3D, and then AI, and you train your AI to detect specific things, pipeline leaks, anything that would make your workflow more automated, more streamlined, and more cost efficient. That is where we don't do that ourselves as Auterion, because we're building a platform and we allow, or we want other companies to build products, build applications on top of our platform, both on the drone, so you can deploy AI apps on the drone, real time, or in the cloud for post-processing after the flight.
Okay. All right, thank you, Kevin. Okay, last question, and since you're all in Switzerland, this may be interesting for you all to take a look at. It is regarding regulations in Switzerland. The question is, the new regulations with height limits at 120 meters AGL hinders the drone applications in alpine terrains, where 60% of Switzerland is. Why is Switzerland sticking to this limit at present?
If I may, maybe it's a question for the regulator. So this limit is only relevant for this open category that I mentioned, where you can fly a drone without interacting with us as a regulator. So you can fly in visual line of sight and with the height limit, because we don't want you to crash with any other airspace users. There are a lot of helicopters, for example, in the mountains. However, there are absolutely ways that you can fly higher than this threshold. You will just fall into the specific category where you need to get an approval from us based on the SORA process that I mentioned, which allows you to fly basically as high as you want, as long as you can convince us that you can manage the air risk so that you don't collide with anybody else. You can use this by different approaches. So we don't tell you how to ensure the separation from other aircraft. You just need to convince us that it is possible that you get to an acceptable level of safety. We have a lot of operations ongoing that fly higher than 120 meters in Switzerland right now.
Thank you, Marcel. And I think with that finishes up our webinar for today. And thank you, gentlemen, for your great input, and I hope it was helpful to everybody that listened today. I'd like to remind you that we have several more webinars coming up in this series, and you can see on this page that they are focused very specifically on subsegments within the broader industry, and we hope you'll participate and join those in the coming weeks. On behalf of the speakers and our organizations, we'd like to thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you kindly.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.